Good evening, team. I'm going to talk this evening about cognitive learning theory in the context of a memorable learning experience that I had when I was in high school. It was a Year 9 ancient history class, and our teacher had us copying rote blocks of text that she was writing on the board into our books. There was no discussion of the text, we were just copying from the board, the handwritten, into our books. So in terms of how effectively this supported our learning, it did give us relevant information and lots of it. But it was not particularly goal-oriented. There was no context or discussion of broader historical narratives or anything for us to make any connections to in terms of the short-term information that was being loaded upon us. In terms of how this demonstrates the strengths and weaknesses of cognitive learning theories, I'd like to give some context. Duchenne and McMaw state that a number of early cognitivists found that there was a connection between human control over learning and meaningful internal information processing. Jaeger and Lutz Burns in the 1990s formed a belief that children learn by constantly developing and adapting perpetually more complex banks of related information, which are commonly referred to as schema. The information processing model came out of a 1968 work by Atkinson and Shiffrin. This forms the basis of the information processing model. The basic idea being that fleeting sensory memory is worked with in connection with previously stored memory as working memory, and the resulting new information is stored as new long-term stored memory or schema afterwards. And over time, this process is constantly repeated, resulting in increasingly complex schema stored in long-term memory. In context of my learning experience, I retained none of the new information that was presented in this session, despite having a very vivid memory of the particular session. I remember rushing to write all the information the teacher had written on the board down in my notebook before the bell rang, but at the same time I made no connections to long-term memory or existing schema that I had at the time, and no adaptations that I recall. So this experience defends the strengths and discounts the weaknesses of information processing theory. If we had engaged in drawing on or discussing existing schema in the context of the new sensory memory information being presented, I would remember the connections through new schema that I developed in the session, instead of the rush to write down a new chunk of raw data information before the clock ran out on the lesson. Clara and McWhinney claim that the brain is not always as reliable a tool as computers for retrieving information, rendering the theory less relevant than it should be, and long-term information retrieval an inconsistent process. But if you don't expect it to do so, how will we ever find out what the brain can really do? Thank you.